What if the anger you are most ashamed of is actually trying to tell you something that you've been ignoring for a long time? You might love your partner and you love your children and you care really deeply about the people around you. And still sometimes you feel so angry that it frightens you. You might have moments where you think, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it anymore. Why is everybody always needing something from me? I just want people to leave me alone. Or perhaps you've had an outburst that felt completely out of proportion to what was actually happening. And afterwards, that anger disappears and shame takes over. You start to replay it over and over again in your mind on what you actually said. You question yourself and you start to wonder, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be calmer? Why am I becoming someone I don't even recognise? But what if your anger isn't telling you that you're a bad person? What if your anger is telling you something inside that you've been carrying for too long and you need to get it out there? Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm an anxiety therapist and I'm the creator of the Heart to Heal method. I help people to understand the emotional patterns, the stress responses, and the experiences that shape the way they think, feel, and respond, so they can move away from feeling overwhelmed, disconnected, or stuck towards greater calm and confidence and connection. When it comes to anger, I think there is something particularly important for women to understand, because many women have spent years learning how to make their anger really, really small. You may have learned to be agreeable. You may have learned to just keep the peace. You may have also learned to think about everyone else's feelings before your own. You may have also learned to be really patient and to be really nurturing and to just cope with it. And perhaps somewhere along the way, you've learned that being a good woman meant not making other people uncomfortable with what you felt. So instead of you saying, this isn't okay with me, you just stay really, really quiet. And instead of saying, I really could do with some help, I'm struggling, you just carry on and you just keep going. Instead of actually saying, look, I'm exhausted, but you won't say that because you don't feel right saying that. And what you'll do is you'll keep on pushing through. And eventually, all of that emotion has to go somewhere. You might recognise this. You've had a particularly difficult day. You've been answering questions. You've been solving problems. You've been looking after everyone else within your circle, and even people that are not in your circle. You've managed to do your work. You've managed to also do the housework. You're managing relationships. And you're also doing the remembering of things that no one else seems to remember. And perhaps nobody has actually asked you, how are you? So the problem becomes that you just keep going. And you tell yourself, it isn't that bad. Other people have it harder than me. I should be really grateful for what I've got. I shouldn't be this angry. And then something really small happens. Someone leaves a cup on the side. Someone leaves a pot in the sink. Someone leaves the shoes at the front door. Someone asks you one more thing and you think, oh my God, I can't cope with this anymore. Or it could be that someone just doesn't listen to what it is you're saying, and suddenly you go boom and you explode. And the strange thing is, you know that that one small thing wasn't really the whole reason for why you decided to kick off. It was simply the moment when everything that you'd been holding around you and inside you had finally found a way to come out. And then comes the guilt. So you start to apologise. You start to tell yourself that, you'll do better next time. You promise yourself that you won't react like that again. And then you go back to suppressing every single thing that's bothering you. And then the next time comes along and the next explosion. So this is where I want you to pause, because anger is not automatically a problem. Anger is an emotion. And it's an emotion that carries a raft of information. Sometimes anger is telling you that this is getting too much. Sometimes it's telling you that something isn't fair. Sometimes it's telling you that your boundaries have been crossed. It might even be trying to tell you that you need something. And it could be trying to tell you as well that, you're not feeling heard by people, or that you're feeling exhausted. And it could be trying to tell you as well that you've been giving more than you have the capacity to give. That doesn't mean that every angry reaction is justified. And it certainly doesn't mean that anger gives us permission to hurt other people. But what I want you to do is to recognise the difference between having anger and what you do with that anger. Because the emotion itself is giving you information. The behaviour that follows is where responsibility comes in. And, sometimes when you spent years believing that anger is unacceptable, you don't learn to listen to it. You just learn the art of suppressing it until suppressing it becomes impossible, because you've filled up all your angry buckets and there is nowhere else for it to go. Sometimes what looks like anger is actually an emotional overload problem. You may not be angry because of what happened 5 minutes ago. It may be that you're angry because of everything that's happened over the last 5 years. Things like the conversation that you never had, the needs that you kept putting aside and, dealing with everybody else's, the resentment that you didn't feel allowed to express, the boundaries that you kept moving to accommodate everybody else, and the times you said, it's fine, when it really wasn't. And it could be things like, the exhaustion that you just kept ignoring. And perhaps the deepest pattern is this: you became so good at being there for everybody else that you stopped noticing when you needed somebody to be there for you. So your anger becomes the emotion that finally gets through. And that's not because you're broken, it's not that at all. And it's not because you're unstable. And it's certainly not because you're a bad mother, partner, colleague, woman, whatever. But because something inside you may be saying, please, please listen to me. My Heart to Heal approach isn't about getting rid of your anger. And it isn't about telling you to simply control your emotions. It's about becoming curious about what your emotions are trying to communicate to you. So instead, we start asking questions like, why am I so angry? And we could also look at asking, what happened just before you kicked off? And what are you actually feeling underneath it all? What boundaries had actually been crossed? And what have you been carrying around that has just got far too heavy for you to carry? And what is it that you need or needed at that time, but you felt unable to ask for it? And sometimes, beneath the anger, you may discover that you are completely exhausted. Or it could be that you're hurting in some way. Or it could be that you've got some fear going on. Or it could even be that you're grieving for something. And it could be that you're disappointed. And this disappointment is something that's been, lurking around, but you haven't dealt with it. or it could just be that you felt invisible for far too long. And this is where my Art to Heal method and my Heart to Heal process begins for you. You know, you recognize what the patterns are. You create a space to process what's been held inside. You learn healthier ways to communicate your needs and your boundaries and your emotions. And you then become more confident in expressing yourself without abandoning yourself or hurting others. The goal here isn't to become less emotional. It is to become more emotionally aware. Through this work, you can begin to experience your anger differently. You may become better at recognizing it before it reaches breaking point. You may begin to communicate your needs earlier so that you don't feel so emotionally overwhelmed with it. You may become more comfortable with setting your boundaries, and you may notice less guilt and shame around having these emotions in the first place. You may even begin to understand what your anger has been trying to tell you all along. And perhaps more importantly, you can learn that having a strong emotion does not make you a bad person. You don't have to choose between being kind and having boundaries. And you don't have to choose between loving people and being honest about what you need. And you don't have to silence yourself to be worthy of love. The goal isn't to remove your anger. It's to understand it well enough that you are in control of what happens next. If you recognise yourself in this video, I want you to think about something, pair. The next time you feel that familiar surge of anger, instead of immediately asking, how do I make this feeling go away? Try asking instead, what is this anger trying to tell me? Because sometimes anger isn't asking you to become quieter. Sometimes it is asking you to finally listen. And if this video helped you understand yourself a little bit differently, please like and subscribe and follow along for more conversations about anxiety, emotional well-being, and the hidden patterns that shape how we think, feel, and live. If you'd like to understand more about the Heart to Heal method and the patterns underneath the way you think, feel, and respond, you'll find my free Heart to Heal guide link below. And if you feel ready to explore your own patterns more deeply, you can also find information about working with me through the Heart to Heal method. And remember, your time to shine starts from within. Thanks for watching. I shall see you all again soon. Bye for now.